Okay, so today's genealogy tea time. We're going to talk about documenting our family traditions. And for those of you new, I am Sherry Daniels. I'm the director of the Genealogical Research Library here at the SAR headquarters in Louisville, Kentucky. And we are so close to Christmas, you guys. I can't believe we're this close already. A week from today, it's Christmas Eve. So we are so close. With documenting family traditions, the thing about this topic, it doesn't necessarily have to be
Did you hear that? They're
holiday
talking about
related
family traditions.
traditions. It can be traditions about anything, honestly, that comes to mind, something that's really important to your family. We're going to talk about not only what kind of traditions you have that come out that are important to your family, but how we might try to capture that. And that's tricky. We're going to talk about the different problems and how some of the formats might be the best, depending on whose information you're trying to capture. I will divulge some of that family information and the personal experience I've had with that one as we go along. So one of the things, there's not too many people in here today, so I'm going to say, let's do a quick round robin and kind of just quickly introduce yourselves, tell us where you're coming from in the country, and then give us one family tradition that is important to you. And let's just start sharing that way. And then we'll get a little bit more into kind of brainstorming how we document some of these traditions or what we might need to think about when we document these traditions. I will start off, I know I introduced myself, but I will start off by saying one family tradition that I have is slightly tied to Christmas just because I tend to make these cookies at Christmas. But my great-grandmother had a sugar cookie recipe that every time I visited her house, and she died when I was 10, but every time I visited her house, she had this little glass bowl with a lid that was full of these sugar cookies sitting on her table. And of course, as a kid, that's the first thing you look for, is the sweet treat there on the table. And her recipe was just a little, she had cut it out. It was printed on the side of a bag of William Tell flour. So it's technically paper. But it's very stained, and you can tell it's been sitting around in her kitchen. And my dad, I think she gave it to my mother, or when she died, my mother made sure that she got it. So my mother has the original. My dad, in thinking that he was helping, he laminated it, which in archival land, that you hear screams when someone talks about lamination. You just don't do that. It lucked out for him. This thing has actually been just fine. I don't ever, as an archivist, I don't ever recommend laminating anything just because of the heat and the off-gassing that can occur. So it can damage it over time. And I look for it eventually too. However, that's been at least over, oh my goodness, it's probably been over 30 years ago that he laminated this. So it's been fine. But what I do is, not only is the cookie recipe a tradition, we make this in the family, but the recipe itself, because it goes back to our great-grandmother, whenever someone in the family gets married, I take a color copy of that recipe and I frame it up and give it to the bride and groom so that they can keep that in their kitchen. So they've got a little tradition. That's a family recipe to pass down. And so that's just one little way that I can kind of hopefully keep it in the put it in the purview of the younger generation, something simple. They can kind of sit around and maybe they'll get curious. Because actually it's a really great, sugar cookies sound simple, but honestly, the secret ingredient is nutmeg. It's really, really great. I would almost call them nutmeg cookies. They're a little bit slightly different from regular sugar cookies, but they're fantastic. So that's just one little tradition for myself. So I see, as I kind of go around, it'll be based on my screen and what I see, but I see Carla is the first person that I see. If you want to tell us where you're coming from and give us a little tradition that's important to your family.
I'm Carla Trussell. I'm from Texas, which is southwest of Fort Worth. And I was trying to think, I've been writing. So I wanted to think, what did I want to share? But for my grandmother's 25th anniversary, my granddad gave her a very expensive punch bowl that he purchased at the jewelry store. So I still have that punch bowl. And every time my grandmother hosted a club meeting or any occasion at her house, she made a punch for that punch bowl. And so I've started the tradition of always making that punch on Christmas Eve in her punch bowl. So, and I always point out that it's her punch bowl. I hope the kids will remember it. But, and it's not an alcoholic punch. It's just Kool-Aid and pineapple juice and ginger ale. But
Yeah.
I loved it when I was a little girl. So
That's awesome. And I love that you point that out to them, like each Christmas, and you bring that out, and, you're reminding them where it came from. And so hopefully that'll stick, they'll remember that.
hopefully.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, the next person on my list here on my screen is Jason. Hey, Jason, welcome back.
Hello, my name is Jason Miller and I'm from Pittsburgh. Probably, it's hard to come up with a tradition off the top of my head. I know ever since I was a kid, there's several Christmas movies that my family always has to watch every single year. The Chevy Chase Christmas, The Christmas Story, maybe Home Alone, It's a Wonderful Life. Every year we have to sit and watch those. So that's probably my family tradition, as well as cookies. I like the cookie thing.
I like cookies. Cookies and movies go together so well too, right? Like, you can sit in front of the TV and just eat those cookies, enjoy the cookies. I love that. Honestly, it's true. And I think that movies became so important, such an important tradition to, more of the 20th and 21st century kids. We had that ability to play those movies now in our home instead of having to go to a theater. And so that evolved for us, as a very important tradition. And it's true. There was, I won't call him out because he's a rather kind of famous genealogist, very young. But he came out and he was kind of frustrated over the Christmas music that he was hearing on the radio. And he's like, why is it always like the 1950s and 60s? Like, I'm tired of hearing Sinatra and all of this different things. And I'm just like, oh, I don't think he gets it. That, like, for me, that's fascinating. Now, I agree with variety. I'm okay with variety. I love hearing new Christmas music. That's really cool. But I love the fact that this is the season that all the different various popular songs for decades, they come out at Christmas. And we get to hear the classics. We get to hear, some of these singers that were really super popular back in the mid 20th century and latter part of the 20th century. That's really cool that just for this one little season each year that it comes out and everybody gets to listen to them and enjoy them. And so, but yeah, we mix it in. We don't want to exclude any generations. We get some of the new songs too, but no, I love that. And so, yeah, movies are the same kind of way. Look at White Christmas, that's 1950s, but so many people, that's part of their tradition. And I love those movies where, like the one-liners, even our preacher in church sometimes will be like, the blessing. Which, if anybody who loves Christmas Vacation will get that one. So my dad loved that one. That was actually his favorite. So awesome. All right. Thanks, Jason. I see Mary Ellen is the next person on my list.
Hello. I'm listening. I'm busy making cookies, so I've got it on audio so I can hear.
Is that your tradition, Mary Ellen? Where are you coming from? And is that your tradition, making those cookies?
Oh, well, I try to, from just Bardstown, Kentucky. I'm watching one of the grandbabies and making cookies.
Wonderful. Sounds very relaxing, very, very Christmassy. I love it. So thank you so much, Mary, for coming. And next I see Brad. Brad, you want to tell us where you're from and give us a family tradition that's important to you?
Okay. What I'm saying is I live in mid Illinois, and I'm lucky enough to have both of my children live nearby, and their kids, of which I have 6 grandkids. We all gather on Christmas afternoon, and part of that we have been doing since my kids were little is to gather all the children on a staircase and take their picture. So I have over 20 years of photos of the kids at yearly intervals in pretty much the same pose. And then, of course, their kids too. So it's a nice collection over time.
That's wonderful. Now, have you decided how you're going to preserve those or share that going forward, do you think?
I have kind of put a collage of those together,
Yeah.
and use that. And occasionally my daughter will take some or several of those and put them on the following year's calendar as she makes
Yeah.
the custom calendars.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think one of the things that has hit me going forward, I think in time, is that there's sharing things digitally, which I think we have to be cognizant of. That's how the next generation is really, that's going to be their dominant way of sharing things is digitally. So as long as we do that as well. But honestly, there's digital migration, and sometimes even I mean, as busy as I get, sometimes digital migration and making sure that things are backed up enough to be preserved digitally. It's like, I still like some of that print stuff. So I love the calendar. I know they're probably going to keep those. Like they're not going to toss that. They're going to stick that in a drawer somewhere over the years. And so at least hopefully it will, migrate down the generations. Sometimes that physical copy, it's like, sure, I love digital. That's great. But whoo, for long term, I still like some of that physical stuff. I love the calendar idea. That's really cool. I have a friend of mine that she makes the calendar every year. She just pulls out historical images she's got in the family collection, and she just makes the calendar every year. And family love it. They just really love it and keep those and have a great time with them. So yeah, that's really great. Thanks, Brad. Next I see is Deborah.
Yeah, do you mean me, Deborah C?
Yes.
Hit on me. Well, I live in North Georgia, but I grew up in California. My dad's family's from Iowa. My mom's family is from New York. We got moved out to California when I was so young. I didn't grow up around any family except us four. So I don't really know of any family traditions. I mean, we probably do, but I don't know them. I do remember my great-grandma. I got to go there 1 year for Christmas. And she had those bubble lights.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, and
oh my gosh. Those are pretty expensive now in the secondhand stores, in antique stores. Those bubble lights are pretty expensive now. There's not many around anymore, but although did they start remaking them again? Because they were kind of popular. Yeah.
On eBay, I've got vintage bubble lights saved as one of my searches, and there's always lots of them in there. I just haven't looked at them in a while.
Yeah.
So I need to find out who got those.
Yeah.
And I was just, based on this webinar, that I need to find out who got those after great grandma died.
Right.
And get to take a picture.
Yes.
When they get the bubble lights going, or else maybe a short video.
Right.
Maybe put that as part of her, because I'm working on like a biography of everybody, of course, so like everybody is. But with today's technology, I'm thinking that, and I saw the webinar, I forget who gave it, someone recently, that you can incorporate pictures and text and videos and do it over Zoom, and you can incorporate all that instead of just, doing a book. It's just putting together a presentation with the text and the pictures and the video.
Yes. Yes.
If somebody takes a video of these vintage bubble lights on their Christmas tree, that can be part of great grandma's biography.
That's a great idea. That's actually a really great idea, because that's Zoom is one of those things that's it's really available to all of us. We literally can just schedule our own meeting and record what we want to record, and we can share images that are already digital in our computer. We can, and like you said, the video, you can pull all of that together and you can record it and then share that whole packet like you're talking about. That's a really great idea. I do that here so often, but that's great. That's really great. I like that. That's awesome. And when you talk about, you can't think of any traditions, but that is a great one, honestly. Decor, especially in the seasonal time, when we bring out certain things that we decorate with sometimes over and over and over again. It's funny because traditions can change, depending on the family unit, depending on just time. And sometimes you move and you change your tradition a little bit. And especially when it gets to, the holiday season and decor, we change a lot. My personal tradition is I tend to buy Christmas ornaments that are connected to places that I travel. So if I go someplace new that year, I will grab a Christmas ornament from that place because I don't know, just something that developed. I have no idea. It wasn't something I inherited from anyone else.
Refrigerator magnets because they're small and flat.
Yeah, actually, I do that too. I do both. But it's like I will only get a certain kind of magnet, like the enamel kind that's literally going to, be around forever. They won't fade or anything. So yeah, I actually end up doing both of those. But that was just a weird habit that I did. My mother, on the other hand, she decided to get a bulb for every year that she and my dad were married. Well, that ended up being over 50 years. And so I've noticed that when like my grandparents passed, the bulbs or the ornaments, like that was one thing that there weren't that many around. There weren't that many left. Like that didn't carry on as strong with that generation from my family. Like there was a few. And the kids, the grandkids, we all took like one or two. But I do, and on my tree, I actually have ornaments from at least about 3 generations back. And so yeah, the decor and bringing those out, especially in the holiday season, can be really, really important traditions, and they're tangible traditions. Like those are things that were on the tree for now. I've been on the family trees for decades, for generations, and that's cool. I love the bubble lights. I don't think my family did have the bubble lights, not even my grandparents, but I've seen them a lot. They're very pretty. Yeah, and I love the video. You got to take a video of the bubble lights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bubble lights in action. You got to do it. That's great.
Also had to used to make a city,
Oh,
and I've got to figure out who took that.
yeah.
I'll never make it, but at least I'll have it.
Right. So next I see on my list is Donna.
Hello. Hello.
We hear you. You're good. You can.
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
okay. No, on my side of the family, we always got together on Christmas Eve, and that was with our family, the extended family, great aunts and uncles, and we would all sing Christmas carols, and then just kind of linger afterwards. And then, of course, it was midnight church services. My husband's side of the family, his mom would make 3 or 4 roaster pans full of rosettes, which is like a Swedish cookie. So there's been several. Our own Christmas, our own family does family ornaments, and we have their names, and everyone puts their own ornament on the tree. So, and it's just, and even the our parents who are past, we have ornaments for them.
That's great. I love that.
So,
those are some great ones. Absolutely. When I was little, we used to do the midnight service for Christmas Eve. I missed that. That was that event that for us that eventually died just based on trying to get to both sides of the family with my parents and my grandparents, and it became such a time crunch that we eventually kind of did away with that. But I loved it though. It was really special. It was almost, I wouldn't use the word magical, but it was just such a beautiful moment in
right,
the candlelight
service.
Yeah, so beautiful. Yeah, I missed that one. And that's the thing too, is think about, I think it's really important too to document traditions that you remember that may have died. I mean, that's okay, because like I said, traditions will change, and sometimes traditions come and go, but sometimes those traditions can be around for a really long time, and can tell can give a really great snapshot of the generation that lived during that time and what was important. And in fact, one of the things that I'm reminded about was the tradition of decorating your tree on Christmas Eve. That was a very important tradition. Gosh, I mean, looking back, Jason, I'm going back to the movies. I'm looking back to some of the movies from like the 1940s and 50s, and they'll talk about going home to, to trim their Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine doing that on Christmas Eve. That would drive me crazy because, we don't keep our tree up as long as maybe they used to do back then. But it just seems like we all decorate so much. Like there's just so much work to it. That's like, we want to enjoy that tree for a long time. So for a lot of people, that tradition has like just gone. Like we will decorate the day after Thanksgiving or 1st of December or whatever.
Yes.
And some of
Yes.
that Christmas Eve tradition though, actually, I know this sounds like a historical stretch, but it's not really. I was watching, there's this kind of a TV tradition I have, recent one. This is not it's not a real tradition, but I've been in my movie rotor of things that I watch is this special that Lucy Worsley did in England, and it's about like a Tudor Christmas, and she talks about the different traditions or the different things that they did when Henry VIII was king, for Christmas, and that is fascinating. There's some amazing things, but she says keep in mind that back then they did honor the 12 days of Christmas, and their 12 days of Christmas started on Christmas Eve. And she said the tradition was that the season started on that night, and she said that part of it was decking the halls. Basically, now they didn't have Christmas trees because that didn't start in England until like Victorian era, came from Germany with Prince Albert. So Germany was doing it, all of that. They were doing Christmas trees. But over in England at this time, that was part of what they did, was to deck the halls, trim everything with greenery and berries and everything. That was the Christmas Eve tradition to start the 12 days. And they said that the greenery was also designed to kind of hamper, like for instance, a spinning wheel. Like they would weave ivy through it so that you can't use it those 12 days because they wanted everybody to rest. And so that's one of the things that they would do with the decorating. But that reminded me that 12, in fact, they said, like, think about Shakespeare, when they writes about Twelfth Night, that's because that tradition, again, was so firmly in place at the time. And so when you talk about, when you hear them talking about in the mid 20th century that they're going to go home on Christmas Eve and decorate their Christmas tree, I can't help but think that that's a leftover tradition from a really long time ago that we just don't understand. I mean,
Hi.
which is really, really cool.
You smell anything down here?
Is this Vi talking?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be talking. I'm at work. Okay. I'm sorry.
I thought you were trying to take your turn. That's okay. You can, Vi, if you'd like to tell us where you're coming from, and you can share a tradition real quick. You're
Okay.
welcome to do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, I do. I'm from Springfield, Illinois, and my family did the Christmas service. So now I've changed the tradition for my own self. And so since I attend 3 different congregations, I go to 3 different services Christmas Eve. And that's my tradition.
Yeah.
That my mother started. We went to the Catholic Mass, at midnight. And so I do the Unitarian, the Catholic, and the Methodist Christmas Eve.
Wonderful. That's great. Yeah, we love those Christmas Eve services. Those are so wonderful. So welcome. And then next on my list, I see Damon. Damon, you want to tell us where you're from and share a tradition?
Yes, how are you? I'm originally from New York City, born and raised, but I live in Darlington, South Carolina. And I was going to ask, do the traditions have to be only related to Christmas or the holidays, or it could just
No, it can be anytime, absolutely.
no problem. Well, one tradition that we do have, I moved down to Darlington. My dad was born and raised here, and we have family land. So something that we've done we haven't been doing it the last couple of years, but is we gather and have a family harvest at our family land. So, we just get together, family flies in, and, we just really get together and plant. We'll generally do that. We'll plant together. So actually the harvest will come later, but we generally plant together and, just get the family, the kids involved, get their hands in the dirt. And, that's just been a big tradition for us and something that, I guess I've been glad to be able to pass on to my sons for them to be able to have those experiences of getting their hands dirty and just eating, the food straight from the ground. So yeah, that's definitely one of our big family traditions.
That's fantastic. Now, was this like an industrial crop, or was it just a really large, like a really large garden? I mean, my grandmother grew a garden. It was like a quarter of an acre. It was humongous.
Yeah.
Humongous to us.
It's a large garden. That's part of our, it's a large plantation that our family, we have our lineage comes out of that. So it's air property that we have because our ancestor, he owned the property.
Wonderful. And I've got some memories of doing that. The tradition failed for us just because, well, the land is still in the family. It's just, my uncle's kind of older now, and so he doesn't really grow that much. And my aunt still grows a really big garden, but that's her garden. It's not my grandmother's garden anymore. And for several generations, yeah, we would. It's interesting. I see what you're saying about a harvest. That's really bringing back some memories because we would get. I don't know. I guess we would visit my grandmother probably once a month or so. But yeah, during a harvest, you're right. I mean, well, even during planting season, planting and harvest, you're right. We were all out there in the garden helping her. We told her every year she was growing way too many green beans, but she didn't listen to us. And so it seemed like we had to go down during the harvest season a whole lot more because, yeah, there was a lot to do. And then I remember canning and freezing and, well, she moved from canning to freezing because she bought herself a big freezer. And
got it.
Yeah, I remember all of that kind of assembly line stuff, but gosh, I miss it.
That's what, like you said, the assembly line part of it.
Yeah.
Just everybody, all hands on deck. And, the last time we did it, we actually had a whole bunch of flooding that went on, and we had to, clear the flooding and get the dirt ready for the seed. And, it all worked out really well. So yeah, definitely glad that I've been able to enjoy those type of experiences.
Oh, those are priceless. They really are. I'm jealous you guys still get to do it, but because I do miss it. Those are priceless. Absolutely. And by the way, the next time that you're still doing it, make sure you take some pictures of what everybody's doing and, maybe grab a little video here and there. And, even of the assembly line process, I just recently, I took a picture of my mom. Well, I actually took a little video. My mom was making something recently, and it was just something she makes every once in a while, and just they're cheesy pockets. And she was just, kneading the dough and rolling out and everything and putting, and I just took my cell phone out and I just started videotaping her hands as she was working the dough and all this. And after I got done, I was like, oh, this is really great. Like, I love this. I would always, I'd pan out and so you could see my mom and what she was doing. But it's like, oh my gosh, there's a part of me says, oh, I wish I'd done this with my grandmother's, so yeah, those wonderful, priceless moments of experiencing what you're doing down there. That's really special.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I definitely do. I try to document all of that because, that's how you keep traditions. It's about documenting.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, that's a wonderful one. So I think one question that I'm going to kind of open the floor basically is we've talked about various ways to document, and that's essentially that's our topic, is to try to document as much as we can. I have done so many different ways, and I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite, although I remember at the beginning of this discussion that I mentioned there is sometimes you have to adapt how you're documenting the tradition based on who it is you're talking to. My grandfather was he loved to tell stories. He loved to tell them, and every time I was around him, he was telling some story. And I remember trying to document those, and his radar for a recording device of some sort was extremely high. And if he thought he was being recorded, he wouldn't tell it. And if he caught that there was one sitting like in the middle of a story and he would shut up. He's like, nope. So I had to resort to writing down his stories. And, so I would just really try to pay attention. It's not the best in the world. I mean, that's like essentially it's not primary. That's a secondary account of a story. So, but I tried my best to get as many details as I possibly could. I didn't even write it down in his presence or take notes because I didn't want him to think that I was doing something like that. He was just very, very cautious about it. But I would make sure though that I would go back very, very like the next day or that day once I got home and write down verbatim what I remembered him telling the story. And I would just make a note. In fact, I've got a little journal that I started back, actually it was in my teens when I started this little journal, just says Papa stories. And I would write them down. I would put down the date of when he told me and as many details as I possibly could. That way people know he told them to me. So I could have some errors in my memory. I could have gotten a detail here or there wrong. But to this day, I go back and read those and go, oh my gosh, like I'd forgotten that he told this story, or I had forgotten about this detail. So sometimes, we love this digital, we love printing out stuff and things. But sometimes journaling it down that it happened. Sometimes too, people can tell you something that happens really quick. And you're like, oh my gosh, wait. In fact, my great uncle just recently he's 93. I went to visit him, and my family, they produced wine in Northern Kentucky. They were German immigrants that came over in 1850, and from the moment they landed, they produced wine. And it turns out I found some collective circumstantial evidence that they produced wine all the way through Prohibition. And I mentioned that to my great uncle. Now he had married in, but he knew the family, and he was married to one of the daughters. And so I said, hey, did you know much about this branch of the family? He says, oh yeah. And I said, did you know they made wine? He says, oh yes, absolutely. And I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure they produced it through Prohibition. And I was taking it a little bit from a little naughty, like they're still producing this through Prohibition. But he looked at me and he says, yeah. He said, it probably saved the farm. And I just kind of looked at him for a second, and he said, they bought their farm in April of 29. And he said the stock market crashed in October. And he said, if they hadn't kept going with the sales of wine, he says, they would have lost their farm. And to me, that completely put an entirely different perspective on what they were doing. And so but I wasn't there. I didn't know to record that. Like that just happened quickly. He just told me this, and I'm like, wow. So I did. I went home and wrote it down, but totally puts a different context on the family story. So there's journaling. There's putting together like photo books. There's some people have talked about scrapbooking as a way to document family traditions. I'm not a big scrapbooker myself. I do love ephemera. Ephemera is, for those of you not familiar, ephemera is just things that are tangible, like a concert ticket or something. They're not meant to be really kept. They're meant to be thrown away, but they can really be some great pieces to keep as far as your family history, depending on if they're tied to a special event. So, and then we talked about digital. What are some of your favorite ways that you've been documenting some of your family traditions? And anyone can jump in on this.
I do scrapbook, and I've scrapbooked a lot of different family. My husband's family, his grandparents. I've just done a lot of family. And I fill pockets in the scrapbook pages. So if I have a census or a marriage record or a driver's license or whatever, I put it in the pocket.
Yeah.
And keep it. But right now I'm trying to write a book.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. That reminds me too, one that my aunt did for us one time was my grandmother after she passed. No. I'm sorry. She was still alive when she did this, actually. She gathered some of my grandmother's handwritten recipes, and she photocopied those into a book for everyone for
I
Christmas.
did that with my family, and it's real
Yeah.
special.
That's
Yeah.
that's wonderful. Because then you're documenting their handwriting, you're documenting exactly how they would have presented that recipe, and you're documenting the tradition of that recipe. So many people in the room had different memories of certain recipes, like, oh yeah, I remember when she made this, or because especially with the multi-generations, obviously the older ones remember their mom cooking all of this stuff for them, and then the next generation remembers maybe only a few off the list. But still, it's wonderful to do that.
You can also take recipes, handwritten recipes, and there's certain companies that you can send it into that will make a cup towel out of the recipe, or so that would be really cool to have in the kit. I have one that my daughter gave me.
Oh, that's good. That's a great suggestion. I will put the link in the description of the video for this. But you're right. I'll put in some of those companies that not only, yeah, like you said, tea towels. They'll even do carving, like chopping boards and bowls. They'll reproduce them in bowls and things. So that creates an heirloom of the tradition that then gets passed down. And you can do multiple so that everybody gets one. And so that heirloom has a really high chance, this instant modern heirloom that you've created out of this older tradition. And there's so many of them. It's like mass quantity. You pass that out, there's a high chance that it's gonna survive down the further generations down the line.
And one thing I did that was kind of crazy. I took family quilts to Staples and I made copies of the quilts on the copy machine so that you got a whole page of just a sample of the quilt. And then I put those pages in between the chapters of the book and wrote who quilted that quilt.
That's amazing. So you're talking just like maybe a segment, like a block of?
Yeah, I just took the quilt up to Staples, folded it, set it on their color printer, took a picture of it. So you just have a little section of the quilt. And then I put that as my between the chapters of the book. So, and wrote, and imprinted on there whose quilt it was.
I love that.
So, and I'm glad I've done that because since the quilts themselves aren't labeled, but those pages are labeled, I can go back because I'll be 70 my next birthday. And where 20 years ago I remembered who made each quilt, I've kind of forgotten now. I know most of them, but I do not remember all of them.
Yeah.
So quilts need to be labeled. You can off of Amazon buy tags, that you can sew onto the quilt. And I've been meaning to do that before it's forgotten. So
yeah.
Because it died with me.
And that's one that totally we lost in our family. We've got the quilts, but I don't know who made them. I mean, I know which side of the family they came from. So I'm guessing which women down the line would have made them. And we even have a tradition that one of the women back in the mid 19th century made quilts after her husband died to supplement her income. And I think one of them is hers based on some of the textiles that were used, but I don't have any confirmation on that. And it's like, it's a knife in the heart because I'm like, we lost it. We lost who made those quilts. So yeah, that's fantastic. That's really
I had a really exciting thing happen to me about a family quilt recently. I have a quilt that my great grandmother, it came to Texas when she came to Texas in a covered wagon in 1890. And I always assumed her mother pieced it, and the quilt's been handed down. It's completely hand woven quilt. It's really old. And now that you can access newspapers, they're all digital. Yeah. I found an article about that quilt in the paper, and she had entered it in an antique quilt contest in the 1940s.
Oh, nice.
And she told them when she entered the quilt that it was 101 years old. So obviously her mother didn't piece it because she said the quilt was 100 years. So it documented that quilt because she told the name of the pattern and that quilt. So it was so cool to find that in the newspaper. Just absolutely cool.
Wow. That's That's really cool. That's an amazing gem to find. Oh my goodness. And that
I'm
is
not
true. That's another thing too about quilt patterns is that some of them were very some of the patterns are very, you can date almost based on what's popular. I mean, some of those
Yeah.
really, really old ones that are repeated.
called the Princess Feather. And when I was in Kentucky, in Bardstown, actually, as a junior high student, I was already familiar with that quilt. And I was at Stephen Foster's, the Stephen Foster home in Bardstown. And that quilt pattern was on one of the beds. And I recently visited again at Bardstown, and it wasn't still there, but it was there when I was in junior high and visited. So that was a popular pattern in the mid 1800s, I think.
Now, do you display your quilts out or do you keep them
I
packed?
do display the quilts. I do display them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
They're in an antique showcase from my great grandfather's drugstore.
Oh,
So they're folded and they're in that antique showcase.
gotcha. Very cool. And actually, I'm now reminded. I'm reminded of another memory that's going to connect to Damon's story about the harvest. One of the things that I tried to do too was, because it's a farm, because it was, I mean, we're talking generations of farmers. I then tried to take some pictures of like the tools they were using. And when we left like my grandparents' farm, I took some tobacco sticks, so that I've got some tobacco sticks from that crop that they did. He had a dairy for years. I don't have anything from the dairy, but I've got other things, other tools that he used. And I remember too, when it was still, everything was being used. In fact, my dad was a photographer before I ever arrived. And so he was taking some really good photographs of the different tools that they were using, because then there's the tradition of using that same hoe that was been sitting in the barn for 50 to 100 years, and that those pieces are also important to document that those are here. I have one from my great grandfather. It was a tool. It's a little hammer, and they said it was his. He was actually a railroad man. They said he used it in his work, and so I'm like, well, it's interesting that connects us back even to the occupation that an ancestor had. So yeah, the tools are something cool to document.
Do you have a picture of him?
Do I do. I do have pictures, yeah.
Shadow box with a hammer.
Oh, that's right, I should. And in fact, since you said you're in Bardstown?
No, I said I visited Bardstown. I'm in Texas.
You're in Texas, okay. So, yeah.
Can't you tell by the accent?
Oh, we get so many accents in Kentucky. It's crazy. It's hard to tell where people come from anymore. And besides, I grew up in Cincinnati, so I have a hard time with Southern accents anyway, where they actually come from. Like, a lot of it's just Southern accents for me. I can't quite differentiate where people are, where there's the different inflections are coming from. Gosh. Anybody else? Any other ways to document some of this stuff?
Yeah. I'd like to add something. Me and I co-host a podcast. It's called Hot Almighty, and it's actually about American Indian foodways, Indigenous American foodways. So doing that podcast, we did one whole season, and to start our second season, we had an idea. It was in one of our production meetings, just to have an episode with our mothers on it. So unfortunately, our co-host, her mother had just passed away, unfortunately. But me and our producer, she had her mother come on, and we just had a sit down interview conversation, and really was able to find out a lot more about their own personal histories, about family traditions that we had, and just being able to document that within our podcast. It was really something monumental for us. We definitely, one of our more favorite episodes that we did. And, I just see that value, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have those conversations, for future, and for my sons to be able to listen to, my niece and nephews, for them to be able to listen to later on, yeah, so that's definitely one example, and I just wanted to mention that.
Perfect. And what is it? What is the name? Is your pod? Can anyone listen to your podcast?
Yeah, it's called Hot Almighty. I'll type it in the chat,
Oh,
and I'll put
perfect.
a link.
Yes.
I'll put a link in there for the episode that we did
That's
with
great. And that's the thing about technically that podcasting, that's a really great suggestion, because technically you can also create, if you didn't want everyone to listen to it, you can create private podcasts for your family that you invite them, to listen to. And sometimes you can literally just document your own memories if you need to. Like, and I love the interviewing clearly of your mothers. I mean, that's that's the holy grail right there, as far as history. And then, but if you don't have a lot of people participating in the interview process, you can literally sit and document some of the things that you remember about the previous generations. In fact, I'm doing a presentation for Roots Tech, and Roots Tech coming up in Salt Lake City in 23 is on podcasting your family history. And so that's perfect example. I love that. And especially too, because we've turned the corner as far as, and it's funny how when you talk about younger generations, I'm just going to say present generation, like we're all here, we're all adapting to the changes in technology. And so, we have really evolved into a culture where we are curating our own experience. My mother she still gets, like cable TV, and a lot of people do, but she complains all the time. She's like, oh, it's just, I don't know why I paid for this. It's the same crap all the time. There's nothing good. Whatever. And I'm like, when I moved into my own house, like I never did pay for cable. I paid for things like Netflix. I paid for Prime. I paid, all these different things that I would rather sit and watch something that I choose to do. And for those of the working age right now, when they're commuting back and forth to work, a lot of people are picking podcasts. And so with that generation, that's the one too, that the working generation is, or the working age group is really one that we love to try to connect with, as far as getting them to listen, getting them to retain what it is we're listening to. And podcasting is a fantastic way for them to tie into that. And that way they're curating their listening experience. They're already hooked into podcasts. And if you can do that, and it's not as hard as, I'm sure his is actually a professional podcast. But even the amateur podcasts out there, like I said, you can do one for your family and make it private, but just you can actually do it through your phone. You can actually record one. That's actually what I'm going to tell people about is, there's a free podcasting app out there. You can podcast and it literally publishes it for you, and you just talk into the phone. And I have a actually, that's actually how I do mine. I have a podcast too, but that's how I do it is, I have a microphone that actually, it's a little bit more professional of a microphone, but it's not absolutely necessary. You can do some low bar stuff, but just get that word out, get that story out,
Can I add too? I was going to say the fact that it's a podcast and it is digital, and how you mentioned kind of like it can bridge that generation gap. So like the young people who, they might not want to look at the paper and, read and stuff. Of course, hey, they can sit down and just pop in the podcast. They'll do that. You know what I mean? My oldest son, that's all he wants to do, be a YouTuber and a podcaster. And, he thinks it's just so cool that I have a podcast. Says, oh man, Dad, you got a podcast. So it got him more interested in it than he would probably be just sitting down and telling a story or putting it in a book. So, that's just another way that you can make it appeal to the younger generation, I believe.
Yes. Perfect. And, I wonder too, how much COVID is kind of, in a way, going to make us, it's not going to make us lose family reunions, but almost in a way it might break some of those family reunion traditions. I grew up with strong family reunion. Our tradition actually broke just because the park we used to host them in, they took our shelter away and made it something else. So we lost the convenience. And so then nobody could, organize enough to get everybody back in to a reunion regularly. And so reunions is where I used to really, we get some of those stories and all of that, but that's not as popular. There are some really good dedicated groups that still have family reunions and still share things, but not as much as it used to be. And so, yeah, I love that. Podcasts are That's perfect. And like you said, that's so great about him getting excited. You have a podcast. That's so cool. See, right now, ride that cool wave, like the younger people think it's so cool. So
You got to go with what works,
yeah, that's wonderful. So yeah, that's perfect. Great.
I
Great
asked
way.
about the digital because I have concerns about the digital. Can you hear me? I mean, how do you save that podcast? Can you hear me,
You were breaking up a little bit. So start.
Damon?
Yeah, I can hear you though. I can hear you. Yes.
So I have concerns with digital because I have pictures that are 100 years old, but I recorded both my grandparents and my parents. And with my grandparents, it was originally on a VHS tape, and I had it transferred to a DVD tape at some point, or DVD, not a DVD. And the last time I tried, and I know somebody's got another copy, it didn't seem to work. It seemed to have this,
Mhm.
it wasn't there anymore. Where a picture's still there. I have a concern about digital being there. How do we ensure that it's still there for future generations? Because the computer stuff changes. So, it goes from VHS to DVD to sticks to whatever.
That's a good question. I'll be honest. I'm always concerned about that, right? But I also, I guess, I have some faith in the technological future, right? So even I have some phones that have records on it and different things I've researched, and the phone is like broken. I can't even get it to work. But I still know that information is on that chip. And I know these people know how to get into all these chips and get the information. So I'm not throwing the phone away. I'm going to keep that. It'll be like the book of Eli. Maybe my son's going to be older and say, hey, crack this code. But I also I take certain documents that I really feel are important, and I make sure I photocopy. So I do have my photocopies as well as my digital, but I do rely on both. Definitely.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I have an old computer, and I put a sticky note on it and then typed it. And I said, there is a video clip of your grandparents on this computer. Make sure you get it off.
The forensic digital experts will be able to get it off in the future. Exactly. You're right, though. I mean, there's a few things we can do. I had to laugh though, David. That's really hilarious because my dad died in 2021, and oh my gosh, he was like, oh my gosh, digital chaos, all these different things. Not only his phone, his iPad, the computer, his laptop, cassette tapes, videotapes. Like there's all these different things, all these different formats, and I'm totally overwhelmed with all of this. I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't know how to migrate all of this. And so, yeah, like you said, my only strategy right now is to just keep that technology safe. I'm not going to throw away the phone or the iPad, which is technically like preservation principle, like 101. This whole like stabilization is step one for any preservation effort. Be it physical, like a document, a photograph, whatever, stabilization is the first key. Now, the thing with digital, digital material can degrade over time. So can a photograph. I mean, but digital media can degrade over time. The thing that, from an archivist standpoint, what the best practices they tell you to do, if you can, and this is where it does get really overwhelming because sometimes we've got so many different formats. So like, for instance, you can take a cassette or video or videotape. There are pieces of equipment you can get to play it in there and, convert it over to a digital file. The thing is, you want to convert it to a digital file that has no lossless quality. There's such a thing as there's a lossy and a lossless type of file format. If you can get one that's lossless, then then it won't degrade to the same speed or in fact, hopefully it won't ever degrade. But the point is, you keep it in that format, you're still going to have to, though, over time, migrate that file over to another storage, because digital storage even will degrade over time. So that's the problem with digital that's the problem I have with digital, is that I love
But
digital.
can
It
some-
will survive. A lot of it will survive. Some of it could degrade irrevocably, but like as David says, I think there are going to be really big businesses over in the future that are like, we can resurrect anything that looks like it has died. We will pull it out of there. Whatever old phone you've got, we'll get it, and they probably will. But we do technically things will digitally, and so there you have to commit yourself to, if you convert this over to a file, it's called data migration. Basically, you kind of have to take inventory of what you've got, your digital inventory, migrate it, they say, to a different storage device, sometimes around every 5 years or so. And so, I mean, I guess it's kind of like, I had a patron come in the library one time and he told me about keeping wine past 5 years. She's like, you've got to recork those about every 5 years if you want to keep a wine, long term. I'm like, I had no idea. And so I kind of remind people digital media is kind of a little bit like wine. If you want to keep that bottle till you can drink it later, down the road, you've got to migrate that, into current stuff. But, another solution with that is if you can't do that on your own, and as far as like migrating it into something that is stable, like let's say like a little external server, that's great if it's one piece, but if your house burns down, all your digital's gone, right? So I literally have two little external servers, or no bigger than this, that are pretty large. One lives over at my parents' house and one lives at my house. So, think about that. There's also safety deposit boxes. If you've got an external server, put one in a bank. But you still got to retrieve that sucker every 5 years and, migrate over. There is another solution though, too. Some people actually will go with cloud-based companies that if you upload that, they will do that data migration for you so that it keeps your data healthy. But that's cost. That can be a price to that, or there is a price to that. And then, you have to make sure you research the company well to make sure that they're going to be around, for a long time, or that they have been around for a long time. So there's some strategies, but no, I hope so, David, for all of our sakes. I hope they can get that stuff off, because that's my strategy now.
I was gonna say the cloud. I was gonna go and mention that because Google, I believe they have their cloud is free. So I definitely will use them, because I've had to have that happen when my phone's transferred over. I get a new phone, and now for me to get access to some of those old pictures and documents, I had to go back to Google Cloud. So yeah, that was a suggestion I was gonna make.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's just a personal strategy that and I cannot speak to the quality of the files you can upload, because I don't know how high that you can. I've only uploaded low res to it, but there is familysearch.org. They encourage people to upload memories, or, they're even trying to really build that into where you can put in audio files and things like that to kind of tell stories of the ancestor. Each ancestor, if you build your tree in Family Search, it's a one world tree. It's a public tree. This is not your personal tree. Anyone could come along and change something, which is the big con to that. I don't necessarily, but I actually maintain two trees. I maintain one that's on my computer, that software, but then I also do contribute to Family Search Tree, because I can put out, I've got family Bible records that I want to make sure other people can get a hold of. So I've uploaded those images. And the thing about them with Family Search is that their servers and they're kind of like their own cloud-based, format there. And the thing is, I know that all their servers are in this big giant granite mountain. And I've always thought to myself, well, if the apocalypse happens, I bet you a lot of that stuff in that granite mountain's gonna survive. So I honestly hedge my bets and put a little bit up in the Family Search server as well. And that one's free. That would be free. I don't think you can upload, I don't think you can upload what they would call a preservation quality file. So probably nothing really high res. And we always encourage people go with as high in certain formats. Like if it's an image, go with a TIFF format. So that's a lossless image, which means storage then becomes higher, or as far as, harder, because it has to be bigger. But again, as David points out, I mean, even a lower resolution image, you never know what technology is going to come up with coming up down the road. I mean, being able to clean up, I mean, some of the things we've seen, some of these photo restoration sites and people that are doing that have really just worked miracles on so many of these like faded or, tore up photographs, and just work miracles in that way. And so, we archivists tell people, you want to go with this certain level, but it's not super realistic. I mean, that's great for organizations, institutions to do, but personal archiving that's a little bit trickier. And I'm hopeful that technological advances will save us and our material in the future. So yeah, don't throw it away. But which is why, back to your original thing, Carla, while I do like backing up if I can. I mean, we're clearly with audio and video you can't, but I do like backing up a lot of my stuff with some print. Even if it's like, let's say it's an oral history, and this actually goes back to some fundamental guidelines. Even if it's an oral history, you can actually convert, or a video, you can actually convert what is talked about into a transcript, and then you can pass along that transcript in a print format as well. It's not going to be the same, won't have the same impact as far as listening to someone's actual voice, but the information, might survive in that print format. So, and you could take print, those excerpts of transcripts and put them in, let's say you do a family book or things like that. So you can take pieces of this stuff and kind of, use them in different ways, different formats to pass along to people. So, yeah. Any other questions or fun ways to document?
I was gonna mention cam scanner too. That's just my personal favorite thing to use is cam scanner. I don't know, there might be other ones that people use, but it's a program that just basically any document that I do have, print documents, books and stuff, I just use the cam scanner so I can have my own digital copies as well. And then you can also, if you go from phone to phone, you can download cam scanner and it'll have a cloud as well. So that's just another one I wanted to mention.
Say that again. Is it spell it?
Oh, okay. I'll put it in the chat. It's cam, CAM, and then scanner. But I'll put it in the chat.
Great. Perfect.
No problem.
That's great. I think one of the first things I think that came in, I think it was Vi that mentioned something about like she has a hard time kind of identifying traditions. Like she said, I don't really have any. Or I think one of the things that we can all think about as we go into the holiday season is just be really super observant about everything. Be this kind of be a detective, and Carla was talking about the punch, in a certain punch bowl, and just be really observant about the things that you do. What things that not only what we do, so the order of things, why we eat certain things, especially if it's something you realize we've had this around for a long time, and where did this recipe come from? One that's literally a tradition for our family is this dessert my mother makes, and the family tradition is extremely simple. It was her neighbor made it, and she was a lady we went to our church, and she loved the dessert, and she gave it to her. It doesn't even have a proper name, and we kind of just call it Evelyn's chocolate thing, and that's about all it is. And so there's no family connection, but it is, it ties back to where we lived at that time and when we were kids. And so look around and ask questions, ask lots and lots of questions. Where did they get the certain ornament? Also think about the order of things. I know we were talking about Christmas Eve services and such. That was a tradition for our family for a little while. And then, like I said, we changed that based on, my brother got to be a certain age where we were trying to, it's kind of a long story, but we were trying to make sure that we got to, on Christmas Day, we had to travel to both grandparents. One was in Cincinnati and one was down in central Kentucky. So that was like a 2-hour drive. And so we had to manage to get to both grandparents. And so my parents shifted Santa Claus to Christmas Eve. so that the kids, so we had time to open our presents and enjoy them and play with them. Because Christmas, if we tried to do a Christmas morning, it would just really just cram everything. And we, you know, the kids, we wouldn't have any time to play with our toys. And, you know, and so it was really hard for Santa to arrive on Christmas morning. And so they shifted that to Christmas Eve. And then that put pressure on the candle, you know, the candlelight service and all that kind of thing. So those weird little shifts in traditions and things. So, you know, why do you do a certain order? You know, do you open gifts on Christmas Eve, or do you do that on Christmas morning? You know, Christmas morning is a big tradition for a lot of people. And so, yeah, ask questions. And even if you don't see one right out, you know, strike up a conversation and say, oh, you know, what did you guys do when you were kids? Or, you know, how did that work? And, you know, how many gifts did you get? I mean, I'm telling my age, but like my mother's in her 70s, and she, you know, I'll talk about, well, what did you, you know, how many Christmas presents did you get? And, you know, she'll talk about, it was, oh, maybe, you know, one or two. It wasn't very much. It's kind of just a different generation and how that worked. And my dad had his family had a tradition where, which was totally against my mother's side of the family, by the way. They hated borrowing money for any reason. They were cash people. Like, you worked, you saved it, and then you bought. My dad's side of the family was credit is the way to go. And so they had this little weird tradition. In Cincinnati, there was a store called Checkers. And my dad, if we're in a certain part of town, he would be like, there's the Checkers store. My grandparents, my parents would go there every year. They would do like layaway half the year to purchase the gifts for the kids. And then as soon as Christmas was done, they would then turn around and do some more layaway and all of this. And he just thought that was a great story. Mom's like, oh, that's ridiculous. She just was not amused. And so that's just a weird tradition that they had. So yeah, ask questions.
No, I was thinking about layaway the other day. They don't even, do they even have layaway anymore? It's almost a thing of the past.
You're right. They don't advertise it, that's for sure. I don't
know if any stores still have layaway.
I bet you're right. Anybody heard of layaway?
Probably
I
have
haven't heard of it since I was a kid.
you probably in your story have to explain what layaway was.
True. True. That's true.
We're our age, because I don't think they have it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, David, did you say that you think it's still happening, or
Well, no, I was saying I haven't heard about it since I was a kid. I remember. Yeah, I remember my mom saying she was getting presents on layaway, so that's what I remember. You know what I'm saying? But that was it.
Exactly. And now my brother just turned 40, so when he was a kid, layaway still existed. So we're talking 1980s and 90s, I guess. Because I remember my parents putting one. It was a really big, some sort of.
They had layaway 5 years ago.
Did they really? Okay.
Yeah. But you only could hold it for so many days, and you had to pick it up, and you had to put a deposit on it. I mean,
yeah.
Well, if you didn't pay for it or pick it up at a certain time, you lost it.
Now are you in Illinois? Is that what you said? Where are you?
Yeah, Illinois. Springfield, okay. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Yeah, so 5 years ago at least. Yeah. I tell you, it's funny that so many things that they do away with anyway. It's like, it's interesting. I mean, my mom still uses checks at Walmart, you know, and to me, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she uses checks. But a lot of people do. And yet, how many of the companies try to phase this stuff out? Like, oh, we don't take that, or we don't do that anymore. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And there's something kind of going on.
Can I say something? I think that goes to a broader point about keeping traditions and traditions getting lost, because things are just changing so much, you know what I'm saying? And I think that's why it's even more important to really focus on keeping traditions. But yeah, just had to add that, because I noticed that everything is changing. You know, soon paper money and all that stuff will be just gone. Debit cards, everything gone. And that was, you know, a tradition, right? People had cash, and you know what I'm saying? Even that, just asking for cash. Like, yeah, you got cash. Nobody even has it. So it's like, if we could see that, and I saw that happen just within my lifetime, it really shows you how important it is just to really preserve these traditions, because things go and change so fast, you know?
Exactly. I have to ask about your podcast a little bit. So you're talking about you guys, you talk about foodways and indigenous cultures and everything. Have you discovered, or have you had, I'm assuming you have had moments where somebody will be talking about some sort of food culture, and you're seeing the threads of the ties. You know it's from previous generations. You know it's from really way back. What's some of your favorites that you think has at least survived and is still being incorporated into our food culture now?
That's a great.
Even if it's just in your state, that's fine. But what do you think?
No, that's a great question. I guess one thing here, for example, like we have a pecan festival out here, right? So stuff like that, for example, just like the pecan pies and, pralines and everything that goes on is involved in that. And then, not just here for pecan festival, but going across the border into North Carolina, into the Pembroke, Robeson County, they'll have different festivals, and they'll have the big giant turkey leg, what I'm saying? So that's one thing that's definitely been consistent. And I say one of those things that, for example, well, I guess let me digress a little bit just to talk about why we did the show.
Sure.
We did the podcast in a response to this documentary called High on the Hog. So some people may be familiar with it. It came on Netflix. Unfortunately, that documentary had a lot of misconceptions about a lot of the foods in there, and it was upsetting a lot of people. It upset me a little bit. I didn't really know much about the show, but I heard people's responses, and I said, well, instead of us being upset and arguing about it, let's create our own content, and let's clear up the record. So two things in particular would be definitely corn dishes, which grits is one of those things, what I'm saying? That's one of those things that to this day, I grew up on, and I pass that on to my sons, and, they enjoy it, what I'm saying? And I would say cornbread or like Johnny cake, what I'm saying? Something like that. Either one is definitely another one of those traditions that this has been passed on over time. And again, just it's something that's integral to American Indian culture, and it just, got kind of passed over. It wasn't even mentioned, within the show that they did, but also other things such as, sweet potato, or, what I'm saying, potatoes, even itself, like a nice good potato salad, you know what I mean? So certain things that you realize are very integral to, your culture, your upbringing, and your traditions. So yeah, those are some examples.
That's great. In fact, I love one of my favorite. Oh goodness, now I've suddenly blanked on the title. Goodness, I'll have to look it up for a second. Although you'll probably know it. Michael Twitty's book. Oh, The Cooking Gene. That's it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yes, because that book was used as part of, because he was actually in High on the Hog. So he wasn't in High on the Hog. And I won't say he said anything that was, again, it was just the way that the documentary, it basically just gave all the foodway credit to Africa. And I'm just, in all honesty, this is not the truth, So as I started to study more and even sit and talk with archaeologists and everything, so, hopefully if you go through our podcast, you get to see we've been able to definitely debunk a bit of the things that were going on in that show. But I am familiar with the brother that you're talking about. So I didn't mean to cut you.
Yeah. No, no, I love his book. He's really good. And what I loved about that is, and now I'm definitely going to be listening to your podcast because I'm very intrigued by all this, especially the South. I just feel like there's such a, I don't know, such a web of different food cultures in the South that just, it all got kind of mixed up. But I love kind of picking apart those threads a little bit, like what you guys are doing. And so, he's working on, he was, focusing more on the African influence in Southern food culture, and now you're on the indigenous side, and I love it. I mean, that's what makes America really fantastic in a way. I love that.
I agree, and to me is I appreciate the conversation, so that's one thing that we've been able to create with the podcast, and then we do listening parties in Clubhouse. So in Clubhouse now we're able to have more broader discussions. People come in and bring their insights, and just challenge the ideas, because some things are just off of assumption. Some things that people even say, they're like, okay, well, I assume this. And going into the genealogy part, when you go and do the actual work, you'll realize that maybe what you thought just wasn't the case. You know what I'm saying? So I don't like to, paint a broad brush, because again, it's genealogy. Everybody's story is individual. But me personally, like my lineage is tied to like Saponi, Lumbee, Catawba, and it's amalgamation of those people. And then, I have Irish and French, but I literally haven't been able to find that African lineage and been able to document it. So I just don't assume. I don't assume. I go with what I know, and I go with my family traditions and how it connects. And then I see how it mirrors and parallels the actual indigenous American foodways. So that's just, my method and how I go about tying those threads together. You understand?
And what you're talking about too, which is really important, is that the heavy impact of traditions on everything that we do, and especially the history. So when you're talking about like this food, the different food culture and how complicated, I guess, or complex it is, just think about how the wrong attribution can be made simply because, well, this was my family's tradition. This is what we know. And then that gets passed on. That verbal, that narrative gets passed on when really that may not be the actual origin of it at all. Because Americans, we're very good about, oh, well, this is mine, like mine. This is our family. And this is why we did this. And this was us. And because grandmama did it this way. This is exactly where this came from, right? But yet that may not actually be the real history behind that. And so there's a lot of misconception that gets passed on in these traditions that we try to document. And so traditions are powerful, and documenting the traditions is very powerful and can be very, very biased in their own way. But yeah, very interesting.
Food plays such a huge role in our memories. And so I have been I joined a writing group to keep me on track to writing the book. And so I did a chapter just on my grandmother's kitchen and the memories from the kitchen, whether it was special occasions or having the minister to lunch on Sunday, or how she preserved food, because she used to always dry food in the summer outside in the heat for winter use, or she made a tablecloth in her club one time, and that tablecloth was on the kitchen table for the rest, forever after she made it. And so I tried to draw everything that had to do with food in her kitchen and the memories around her kitchen.
Yes.
Oh, that's an entire chapter book.
It is. You're right. Food is such a, it's powerful. Food is very powerful because it does, they say that, our memories are tied to so many different things. And so when you get, there's visual things and there's, audible but taste and smell is just such a such a powerful way that memories can be resurrected for us. And so if we can document those stories that go with the food, and then not only pass that on, but to continue to tell those stories, every time you've got that meal, every time you've got that dish that's special to the family. And so that anytime they taste it, that maybe that story will start to come along with that taste.
My grandkids are coming this week for Christmas. One set lives here, the other set lives far away. And unfortunately, the weather's not going to cooperate. It's going to be real cold. But one of my most vivid memories as a child is Girl Scout camp, and we made Girl Scout stew. And we made it by putting the ingredients in a coffee can, when coffee cans used to have tin lids. They didn't have tin lids before. And we would bury it in the coals. So I've bought those at garage sales or estate sales, those coffee cans, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to make coffee can stew with my kids and a campfire in the backyard. Yeah. But I think it's going to be too cold this week to do that. But
show of hands, how many people had the tradition of the bacon grease in the coffee can by the stove?
Oh yeah, I still have bacon grease.
I wish I had bacon grease. I'm just going to say this. I have migrated to not being, I just don't eat that much meat. And I don't eat, even though I do love bacon, don't get me wrong. I don't cook enough to have, and somebody online recently, I think it was on Facebook, said, did you know you could actually buy bacon grease? That they actually have that at the grocery store now. You can buy.
Yeah, I saw a picture. Somebody sent me a picture of that. I saw it. I was like, what?
Oh my gosh, for a second, I'm just like, and I literally, I mean, we're going down, we go to Tennessee for Christmas. And so, stay in a cabin. And so, there's a grocery store down there that actually sells a certain, I know by picture, it's a certain cornmeal to make really, really great, cornbread. And actually, I learned this from another friend of mine whose grandmother used to use that. I'm like, ooh, I must find that cornmeal. So I found it and I get it every year. But now I'm just like, yeah, because I haven't seen the bacon grease in my neck of the woods here. So I'm like, I'm going to have to definitely look at that. I bet you that bacon grease is there because, again, the taste and the memories. I haven't worked in Louisville, but maybe eight and a half months. And I would, get some DoorDash, some food. And there's this one restaurant in the area. I usually get like mac and cheese and green beans. And I'm telling you, the green beans, they are my grandmother's green beans. And it's just the minute I take a bite, they are these memories. And I know there's bacon grease and all of this. There's chunks of ham. There's the onions, the peppers. And so I'm just like, I really need to get me some bacon grease because you know what? That's missing with my green beans. I know it.
I got a question.
Sure.
We're talking about preserving things.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to get emotional, but my great grandmother, we made homemade soap out of bacon grease and lye.
Wow.
And I have it stored, it's still wrapped in the wax paper that I wrapped it in the day we made it. I still have several bars. And I want to share it with the family, but it's like, would they even appreciate it? You know what I'm saying?
How old is it? Those bars, how old are those?
I'm going to tell my age, okay? I'm 70 years old, and this was 74 or 5. I think it was 73 or 4.
Okay, so 1973, you said?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Okay. So,
yeah, it's 50 years old, the soap.
So here, goodness. So have you used any of it in recent?
Yeah, I not recently, but it's still when I go to check it, because I put it in this coffee tin. Okay, it's in a tin, and it still smells perfect. It's not moldy. It's not anything. It's still soap.
Wow. Goodness, I don't know. You kind of stumped me on this one.
And this is my great grandmother. She passed in 1984. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's something I don't want to rewrap it. I just want to leave it in the way it is. And then I have another box.
Yeah.
My father owned a boat shop in Decatur, Illinois, and it caught fire. And he had these buoy type keychains with the company name on it. And it's in a box, and the smoke soot is still in the box on these keychains. And these are things I don't want to let go of.
Yeah.
But I know that the next generation would appreciate them.
Right.
But
so the key change, you might be able to get a conservator that can get some of the soot off of that.
No, they're in a plastic. The keychains are fine. All I have to do is tear the plastic off of them because they were all individually wrapped in plastic.
Oh, okay.
But the soot, the fire soot, is on the plastic. Because the keychains are perfect just the way they are. But it reminds me of the fire when I look at them. But it's those kinds of things that I save.
Yeah.
I have my mother's cookbooks, and
all the little stains on the pages remind you.
And her writing was so perfect, you know, it was so extremely legible, you know.
I am not enough of a museum professional to be able to tell you exactly how to keep that soap the rest, because you seem like you've kept that soap wonderfully. So you've got, it's in a tin, and you said wrapped in what, wax paper?
Yeah, the soap is individually wrapped in wax paper and taped, and the tape is still holding.
Okay, so I mean, my advice, if you thought your family wanted a piece, you know, if you wanted to carve that up into smaller pieces and replicate the same storage, there are little metal canisters you could get from the little archival museum stores, and then, you know, replicate the wax. I mean, if you think they would want it, and you could technically pass that on that way. But I think what's fascinating too is you're talking about homemade soap, that's something we just don't do anymore, and that's a long-standing tradition that has been lost. The other thing you could potentially do, because there are people out there that are doing that, especially people that are like reenactors and such. You can either maybe talk with, I've seen some of them that literally they're making soap out, you know, especially with the Revolutionary era, you get some of those reenactors that are out there with the big iron kettle and they're making soap. You know, talk with one of them about the bacon grease, and that maybe they could replicate a new batch for you that you could purchase. Kind of tell them if you remember what your great grandmother put into that exactly.
I've got I have the recipe.
Oh, wow.
And she used Lewis Lye, and Lewis Lye is still available at Walmart, by the way.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And
So,
if you could get them to replicate her recipe, you could then surprise them one Christmas with their very own, you know, bar. It's just, you know, it's the replicated recipe, and yet you've kept the original safe. I mean, the part of me that just kind of makes me cringe, like when I said, you know, kind of carve up a piece, I'm like, no, I don't know whether one would want to do that either, because you've got this, you know, she made this is exactly the format that the bars were in when she pulled those, you know what I mean? She cut that.
And she made it in a iron, one of those
big kettle.
No, it wasn't a kettle. We cooked it on the stove.
Okay.
Well, we heated up the bacon grease. We had to heat up the bacon grease and then put some, I forget what it was, some other stuff in it.
Wow.
And then she lined a metal tub. It was about 2 feet across, about 6 inches high, and she lined it. She greased it, and then she poured all the stuff in it, and then let it set. It had it set up.
Wow.
But it was, you know, and then we cut it and wrapped it and so on.
That's very cool. Gosh, that's a really special artifact, family heirloom. That's amazing. And I, like you said, every time you open that canister, I mean, just the smell of it.
Oh yeah, the smell is still there. And you know, I would think after a while that bacon grease would have done something, but it didn't. It's still intact. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have expected the grease to deteriorate. Yeah. Wow.
No, it was still fine.
Wow.
I check it every now and then.
Clearly it loves the environment that it's in. So the metal and the wax paper.
The other tradition I wanted to share is my first cousin, Bob, got married, and his wife isn't of the same nationality as my mother was. And so she wanted to learn how to make potato dumplings, what we call gnocchi in Italian. Okay, so we had a little gnocchi party, and she opened her kitchen in her home to the whole family. We all came, we all started making it, we started rolling it out, we started cooking it and everything, and they had a great big meal. And a lot of the distant relatives came. It was a reunion, like, and we all cooked this gnocchi with spaghetti sauce. And it's a family tradition. We have it every Christmas.
Wow. And that's
So
wonderful. That's another, that's another,
that's the other side. That's the other side of the family.
yeah, yeah,
Another food story. See how everything's tied to food.
yeah, food. I
Yeah.
know. And think
I
about that.
love it.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's cool though? That reminds me of another great way to kind of, I know we talk about documenting as much as we can, but there's in different ways. We've talked about digital and print and all of this. But think about an experience. Like we're talking about how food and that memory, like will elicit that memory really quick. It's because food and taste, that's just so powerful. But think about the experience of being invited into a kitchen and you experience making gnocchi from start to finish. Like everybody in that kitchen they're not going to forget that. And so the idea of bringing kids, the experience, just bringing kids into the kitchen and making them be part of that process, or not even just kids, anybody in the family, that being part of that process, they won't forget that. And so even that just experience is another way to kind of document it in their psyche and their, Mary Ellen has her hand up, to say something. Mary Ellen, you have your hand up. Did you want to tell us something? You're muted if you're telling us.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm new at all this Zoom stuff. One of the things that I came from a very small town, and you had uncles, great aunts, and great uncle, the family just went on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so traditions have come down, but the families now are all spreading, from coast to coast of the United States.
Yeah.
Everybody has families spread all over, and a lot of those traditions are getting lost. So this has helped me to remember or to set up to get my brothers and sisters together and for us to sit around the table and talk about Christmas.
Yeah.
And because we're spread out, there's 15 years difference, and I was the oldest. I was married and gone when my youngest sibling was celebrating Christmas. And I'm sure he has a lot different view on the family traditions.
Yeah.
So this has helped me, push the little thing, make a notation. This is something we need to do. All sit around the table and record because they'll talk about bits and pieces when you get together. Remember when this, or do you remember when Dad used to do this? And in fact, last night some of them were together, and my nephew, there was a picture of him, and they said, "Doesn't this bring back memories?" And I looked at it, and it doesn't for me, because, like I said, I was gone, but he had my dad's pajamas on.
Wow.
Last night, and he was getting ready for bed, but they said, "Oh, well, those are Dad's pajamas." He's really loved his grandfather and saved all, and he's very sentimental. He saved clothes, and almost every Christmas he comes out with something, and he's so proud. Look, I've got Grandpa's sweater, or the next year's his toboggan, or his. But a lot, I didn't get it. I was going, I must not be getting a picture. This doesn't make any sense to me. But then they explained it. So it's something to remind me to do it. And then the ladies talk about traditions and hers. In the 50s, my dad only had one brother, and he was a priest, and he lived in Rhode Island. And we only saw him once every couple of years. And he would call all the older ones, you had special rates on the phone lines on Sundays and holidays. So Christmas was one of those we could get on the phone and talk forever because it was really cheap, whereas you wouldn't do it the rest of the year. And we'd all gather at my dad's house. We say, "Oh, Uncle Harry's calling at 6 o'clock. We got to be, and everybody take their turn and say hello to him and what you've been doing. He wanted to know what you're doing and how school was or how your family was.
Right.
And I even some of these aunts and uncles would come to the house so that they could talk. And it was really great. And they would send him, being in New England, they would send him food from Kentucky, country ham that he couldn't get up there, and a jam cake, and things that were traditional in Kentucky. And the other priest in where he lived looked forward to every year. They would just send thank you notes because, oh, that cake was so good, or oh, that, and that's just when they were talking about things, that making things, and like I say, sending them off. Dad, he'd spend an hour wrapping that cake, and stuffed sausage. You could send that even in the 50s without it, going bad. All these things, and I don't think my younger brothers and sisters would remember this.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's really important. You mentioned about like getting them all together and how you didn't remember something, but they did. That's the thing about memory, is that you get one event and you've got, let's say, I don't know, half a dozen people experiencing the same event. Their memories will all be slightly different of that one event. So documenting that is really important as well. Yeah, we all pick up on different things, and we attribute importance to different parts of an event or a story or a tradition. And so how traditions, we're documenting what we know about them, but I love bringing that up, of having some sort of group collective talk, kind of like this, where we talk about.
That's what it reminded me of. And I said, I don't know how many people listening or taking, this is so new and different. And that was so great. We worked our day around Christmas Day. We had to be there at 6 o'clock because that's when he called. And we talked for about an hour or something. And we didn't get to talk to him for another year. Because things were so different. Yeah. The technology.
Those are great. And don't forget, Zoom is free. You guys can schedule a virtual family reunion and gather as many people as you want into a little group like this. And you can hit the record button and you can record everybody talking and telling, their family stories, especially because so many of our families are scattered. That would be a fun new 21st century tradition that, people get together during the holidays virtually, and record their conversations. In fact, my dad, oh my gosh, I was born technically, it was in the early 70s. And so, but my dad was stationed at Fort Sill when I was a baby. And so, because that's new for all of them, that's new for all of them, that, these two moved so far away from the Cincinnati area, their parents were, of course, heartbroken. And so my dad, I don't know how he did it. I don't even think they had speakerphone. I don't know what he was doing, but he recorded the phone conversations when the families would call to catch up with my mom and dad and everything. And so he's got those on cassette tape, which I've got to convert now, of course, but hoping that they did not degrade over time. But again, that was just conversation. And I'm really excited about doing that, because I just being able to hear like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and my dad and mom and everybody just, talking about random things, and what was happening in their life that week and everything. And so really
and it just reminded me of how us doing this, but how important it was back in the old days, as my grandkids would say, because we didn't have that technology. And I'm sure there's lots of people. I've had other family members talk. I remember Grandpa's brother who moved to Chicago during the Depression, and he would call that Grandpa every Christmas. None of us were there and heard it, but he remembered the tradition. So
yes, and that's a really good point too. The changes in technology, documenting that. As we tell some of these stories, we're talking about, well, like for instance, the new Elvis movie that came out and everything. It's really triggering a lot of memories for me because I kind of like to say that Elvis was my first love. I mean, he died when I was 5. I mean, it's not like I wasn't like this teeny bopper fan when he was actually, I was a child when he died. And yet I look back, we didn't have the same technology that we do now as far as like viral and, easy access. And I remember the other day trying to think back, I'm going, how did I get into Elvis? Like I was 5 years old. How did I get into Elvis? And it just so happens that I remember my grandmother had a record player in her basement and lots of records, lots of Elvis records. And we kids would go down there and just play with her record player. And I'm just like, that's how I got exposed to music, was just playing with that because my parents would be upstairs because grandma lived 5 minutes from her house. So mom and dad's upstairs, and us kids are just playing, doing whatever, and we're just playing Elvis records. And I'm like, that's how I knew that's how it kind of got into, that I got attached to his music. And, but by the way, I have to tell a story about, you talk about, the phones and the difference in the technology for the phones. My mother tells this story now because she lived in a rural area of Kentucky. She talked about the party lines back in the 50s ish,
Yeah.
for her.
Everything
And
started in the 70s.
okay. And
There was
and my grandfather, everybody knew that this one lady would pick up and listen every time. And so as people, just wanted to know what everybody was talking about. And so he got this one phone call and he didn't want her to listen. And so, but he couldn't call her out and say, hang up. So he kind of couldn't prove she was on there. So he suspected. And so in the middle of the conversation, before they got into any topic that he didn't really want her to hear, he said, do you smell something? I smell something burning. And the lady that was listening goes, oh, my beans. Oh my gosh. And she hangs up and she runs because she thought her beans were burning. So that was like, I don't know how he knew to do something like that to get her to kind of own up that she was listening and get her to panic and drop the phone. I don't know. But it's one of those stories they tell. And I'm just like, the current generations would be like, oh, what? A party? What is that? So that's that history context, those moments we can teach those little pieces of history to the next generations. And yeah. So any other comments, questions? We're getting close to 4:00. We don't necessarily have to go all the way to 4 if you guys are done. But we covered a lot of good stuff. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. One thing I would recommend too is with the holidays, especially we're thinking about this topic, especially if you get together with a group, and you want to talk about these things, try to think up some questions that you want to ask before you have the family gatherings, especially too, because you know how it is. Once you leave a setting, sometimes you're like, oh, I wish I'd asked them this, and I wish I'd have thought to ask this. And, think about those things that, even if it's just to drive the conversation, kind of conversation starters. Think of some questions that you might want to ask, like, what's your favorite Christmas memory? One of the things I noticed that I'm starting to see in like antique stores more often now is the aluminum Christmas trees. Sometimes they're not even for sale. Like you rarely see the aluminum Christmas trees, but I noticed that there's some pictures from like the 1950s that my grandparents have. And I'm like, ooh, we'd really kind of like an aluminum Christmas tree. Those are really cool. And knowing that it ties back to a family tradition and all of that. And, so I would love to ask I would love to go back. I mean, they're gone now. I'd love to go back and ask, what did you think about the aluminum Christmas tree? And what did you think about, and again, like we're talking about changes in memory. What was your favorite memory? Everybody's going to have a different favorite Christmas. I mean, they just are, because we're all different. We have different perspectives. So, yeah. Anything else? Any last?
I have another question.
Sure.
My second cousin is historian. She called herself a historian. She took a picture of my great grandmother and had put motion to it. What do they
Yeah, I've
call
seen-
that? What do they call it?
Well, I believe that's the AI technology.
It's not true. It's you know, in my memory, grandma never moved like that, you know, and it just irked, it upset me to see it.
It was awkward. When they first came out with that, that tool, they came out with that, I think last year or the year before, where you could easily
right.
do that in My Heritage. And now they've got one where if you upload your own video, your own photographs, they can like put it in historical settings. So like you're then dressed like, I don't know, French queen and a pirate. Pirate was my favorite. So
Yeah, it's
sometimes
just,
sometimes they can be fun, but it was weird. There was some controversy about that when that came out, because there were some people that were just like, I don't know if I really like this. Like you said, it gave
well,
some motion.
she never met our great grandmother. So she has no idea that how off it is.
Yeah. And I'd say there was a few of the pictures that worked really well with my ancestors, but there was a couple that just, it wasn't even natural, you know?
Yeah,
And
it's
so
not natural, right?
it did kind of, really distort. It was different. It was very different. And some people really did not like that. And I could see, the only thing I will tell you is that whatever they downloaded, honestly, I don't know how much that will be passed down. Hopefully it may not, since you don't like it very much, hopefully it will not go, too much further to the next generation. They're not high resolution, so the digital quality won't be really great anyway, but that's interesting. And in fact, I don't think we're done with that. I think that's literally something though that's going to get worse. Not worse than quality, but I think they're going to even do a lot more with that, because recently I saw an article about a guy who was now he was videotaping. They were videotaping him in a studio, and he was telling his life story essentially. And their intent was so that technologically in the next generation, they can make a hologram out of him. And so that he can kind of be there in the room virtually after he's gone. And so, and then there's even some of this technology, what is it they call it? Deep fake, where they can take like these younger images of celebrities and almost like resurrect them in a way that make them do things like video that you just look at this and going, this looks just like them, but it's not them. We know it can't be them. It's getting to be disturbing, because
It is.
Yeah, it's getting kind of scary. But
Sherry, I have to go, but I want to thank you so much for what you've done for us today.
oh, you're welcome. I'm glad you guys had fun, and yeah, thanks everybody for coming. It's almost 4:00, so I will wrap this up. Like I said, it's being recorded, and so the links and the different sites and things that we talked about will be here. And I think one last thing that I really do love to do, Carla had mentioned scrapbooking. Don't forget, like with those photo books that you can get, where you upload digital into, and then they print out these beautiful glossy, almost library binding books that are keepsakes. You can have multiples of those printed out. Oh, sometimes like $20, you can hand out to family members. What's great about those is you can kind of do almost a virtual, not virtual, but almost like a makeshift scrapbook in a way. You can scan a lot of different things, recipes, to not just photographs. Think about all the different things you can scan and have those put into those photo books and pass along. So that's another way. Transcriptions of interviews you've done, all these different things that you can do. So yeah, that's another really good tool. I want to make sure we get that in there for the link and everything. So thank you all for coming. This has been a really great conversation, and thank you for sharing the traditions.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye everybody.